Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about filling the gap. In a relationship, sometimes there is a gap that's created, and we're going to take a look about what we do when that comes up. So let's take a look at that.
You are watching the Beyond Sunday podcast.
Through the curve.
I know. I honestly, I was
knuckleballed one.
I was
right in on
expecting like a. Tell me about this, and so
I can
now
do that.
I'm.
If you need help, I'm here to help.
Do that. Lob me something.
You mean like the one where I lobbed you something? You went, try again. 'Cause that
Yeah,
was great.
I mean, I don't swing if it's not a good pitch. So,
Wow, all on me then. Wow,
well, I mean, if it's
that was hurtful.
if it's outside, it's outside. I'm getting the ball, dude.
Before we get started, do you want to watch the episode on reconciliation again first? Do you want to try that one first?
No.
All right. So hey, as we're looking at our episode today, we're looking at a topic on whether we trust each other, whether we put suspicion in there, and it all comes with these gaps created in our relationship. So something I've said that maybe somebody's never heard of. Explain to us what a gap is.
Yeah. So a gap. When you think about a gap, it's any potential space or area where there may be an expectation or a standard that's been set before, and somebody doesn't meet it, or there's relational space where we choose how to respond or assume, and this space and this tension is natural. It happens, but we get to plug something in that gap.
Right. And we talked about this. Well, we were just talking last night about this as we were preparing for today, that, it may be something like, hey, the plan was that you were going to be here at 9. You will have, read in advance and be ready for our discussion. And you go, oh, hey, it's 9:15. I was expecting you a little while ago. And and you're not prepared for it. So there's expectation. What happened? Gap created. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as we look at this, every relationship that we face has this. So, whether you're married, you've got friends that you're hanging out with. And in our case, we're going to talk about work a lot, but you've got those things where we've made mistakes. Something slipped my mind. I forgot to do this. Today, I wasn't feeling it, so I did not bring my very best efforts to something. So there's all kinds of opportunities where we create that gap. And I think it's important that we realize that those things do occur a lot.
Yeah, there's endless and ongoing opportunities every day, if we'll be honest with ourselves, where gaps are created.
Right.
And I think we're so accustomed to it that it sneaks up. When you really start to think about it, I think it gives you a different perspective, and it helps you to actually visualize how often it can happen.
Okay.
But it happens literally nonstop because we're in close quarters and relationship with people, or during the pandemic, not close quarters with people.
Not close quarters.
But relational close quarters.
Right. No, you're right. As you're saying that, we may not think of it in this way, but I think there are ways that just in the smallest way you create a gap. As an example, you may be running past someone, they're having a really rough day, they're under some tension. You toss out just a real quick throwaway comment and run past. And in that moment, that misunderstanding, a gap has been created.
Yeah.
A relational gap that says, hey, I'm having a tough day. If we're friends and coworkers and we're on the same team, hey, what I really need is support and encouragement right now. But instead, I got this comment that feels like judgment, or you're being critical about something. Not necessarily what was intended, but in that quick pass, that was a gap. And how many times in our conversations or those drive-bys that happen during a day, do those gaps even get created? Plus, then you've got, work performance, teams accomplishing things, people being on time. I know that's a big deal for a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
So, gaps all over the place. It can happen.
Yeah, I think, again, we kind of mentioned this in the beginning of the episode, but we make a choice every time there's a gap created.
Okay. Yeah.
And what we choose to put in that gap,
Yeah.
it changes a lot of things. It shifts and alters the external situation and very much the internal inside of ourselves, relationally between people.
Okay.
Because the way that we choose to respond and fill that gap, I mean, it just alters our thinking. That's kind of how we set the direction and tone that we're going to choose to travel with whatever issue or struggle or gap. And so I think we always have that choice, and I think as we look at it, sometimes it's we'll determine our natural choices based on maybe past history with a relationship or friendship or even with family. And I think sometimes we will choose better or easier paths for some relationships. We'll fill gaps more lovingly and graciously with certain people because of relationship that we've had for a long time with somebody, and sometimes favoritism is a big deal.
We've got to be honest,
it
really is.
Yeah.
We have biases. There are some people that, no matter how friendly you are, there are some people that just, they're not your people. In the sense that, hey, we kind of clash frequently. We'll figure ways to, work together, things like that. But you're just not the same kind of folks, and you don't have the same, interests or, kind of pace at work. And so, that person may get the rough end on, what fills in that gap that's been created. But, your favorite person, you go, they're just having a bad day. There's a lot more grace that we would say that goes in that spot. I like what you said, though, when you mentioned the word tone. I like that, and I think it's really important that, here's this moment, here's this gap. There's, like a divergent path that's about to be created here. And I don't think we usually think about it like that, someone says something or does something that creates the gap. You didn't meet the expectation I had in my mind, and we talked about expectations before. Right. But in that moment, I really have a huge ownership because of what I put in that gap space, whether we're about ready to go on this path or this one. But I think in a lot of cases, we would just look at it like, well, they did something or there was this, and we just assumed this was the natural singular progression. Back up, put the right thing in the gap, and actually the whole thing would have changed. Tone's different.
Right.
I like that.
So I think when we look at the choices that we make to fill a gap, I see two obvious options that we have, and they're broad kind of umbrella options.
Right.
There's nuance to everything, but we look at, and we've talked a lot about this. Our team's talked a lot about this around here. Right. But we talk about trust versus suspicion.
Right. And just as a side note, our team went through some training. Andy Stanley does a great talk on this very subject, which is where we learned about it. And I encourage you to go take a look at that. We'll put it down in the show notes if we can figure out the link for that. But so one of the pieces is suspicion. And we've talked about this before. My natural go-to. Always just naturally suspect, always suspicion, or as my daughter would say, sus.
Sus, that's what the kids are saying now.
That's what, see, I didn't even say the old guy thing this time. You did. Well done, you. Well done.
Totally sus.
Yeah, you're going to become a curmudgeon before you know it.
Eggnog, totally sus.
Don't drag the eggnog into this. The eggnog did nothing wrong to you. You got your coffee. Just quit it. But saying. so in the response options that we have, what we can put in the gap, suspicion's one of them. And so in that case, what you're looking at is the fact that you're putting a motivation on someone that says, you probably didn't care. The reason you didn't show up on time or you didn't prepare is you didn't care. Or you may say that that accident or that mistake, which we all have mistakes and things, you actually did that on purpose. So it starts with some of those things. And in all honesty, where it comes from is, like you were talking about before, I've got experiences, I've seen habits, I've seen other behaviors. So I'm going to take this entire breadth of understanding that I have about someone and put that into context and then go, this thing now adds over to that. This is the same pattern of behavior I've seen before. So, suspicion, but I don't even think we have to have a lot of experience. A lot of times we see people on, the road. Some of you got road rage and you know that. And when someone cuts you off or something, usually the worst assumptions come into that gap right there.
Oh yeah.
There's not much grace or
Yeah.
anything there.
You mentioned that, like, suspicion is your natural go-to, and I think, in all honesty, like, you're not alone. The general population.
The behavior of the world would tell me that I'm not generally, but
Yeah, I think sus is the way that most of us lean
right.
almost every time. Like, for me to lean into trust over suspicion naturally as a first thought,
Right.
there has to be deep relationship with a human for me to immediately go there.
Right.
Like, that sounds nasty, but it's true. Like, so often I just assume it's like unbelievable
Can't believe you did
that they would do that.
Right.
And
Yeah, and one of the worst parts about the suspicion piece, if you really do carry it out, it really starts getting to a point where you're coming at is you're assuming things and you're focusing on you're judging someone at that point.
Yeah.
Because you're going, well, you did that on purpose. It's not just a mistake. You're bringing, and we have to understand this is absolutely true, because sometimes I think we'll give ourselves a pass. Well, I mean, they just did a thing. I mean, but what's really happening is I'm judging you and I'm making assessments on your actual character.
oh yeah,
Because I'm saying you did it because. So I've just decided from external circumstances, I'm jumping into your inner motivations. I've decided what those are for you. Mm-hmm. That'll all work out just fine.
yeah. No potential
No
red
harm.
flags
No.
coming at all.
No. Yeah, and so, I think when we look at, if you pause, really think back to some of your interactions that haven't gone well, some of the times you've kind of bumped into coworkers or, a spouse, a friend, and you look at those kinds of things, you go, okay, let me replay that. Mm-hmm. There's probably suspicion in that gap that you've probably found. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really helpful for me when I should say, because I lean towards suspicion, it's helpful for me to, like, after the fact, when I have a challenge or an issue or a gap that is created that I choose to fill with suspicion.
Turns out.
When I look back, it's healthy for me to ask myself, what did I add suspicion to?
Okay, yeah.
Like, and actually, like, for me, it's super helpful to just actually call out the things I was suspicious about, this, and this, and get super specific with yourself. Right. It's really, really helpful. Right. And sometimes, I have seen and can testify that the more and more and more that you work towards it,
Okay.
trust creeps in better and better and better. At least it has for me. I said better too many times because it's not that good yet.
A little bit better.
But it is a little better.
It gets one better. That's
Yeah,
it.
because honestly, I don't like looking back and seeing how suspicious I am of everybody.
Right.
I don't like that. I don't want to feel like that. And it's sticky for relationships.
Right.
Like, everybody can feel that now I don't trust you.
Right. And the word suspicion, things like that, it may sound really severe, but I think it's far more common than we think.
Oh, yeah.
But like you said, trust is hard to lean into, and it's the way we should. But I think one of the fears is if I lean into trust, and I've had these conversations with folks, especially when you get into really deep, marital issues that are pretty tough, that placement of trust in that moment feels like, well, I'm letting someone off the hook. So you were late to our meeting. You said you would be home for dinner and you're not. I thought you said you'd get this done and you didn't. And rather than putting trust in there and starting off on a good foot and saying, hey, I wanted to talk about the thing, which, that's starting with trust. I assume best of you. We start with, oh, I can't believe you did that again. And there's all the judgment that comes. But I feel like, the reason we don't want to, in some ways, is, I'm going to let you off the hook, or you're going to do it again. And, I think we're honestly afraid of, I'm just going to become a doormat and you're just going to walk all over me because I'm trusting and you're getting away with stealing the moon now. So, it can be real hard to step into it. But why is it important for us, though?
Well, it's important because it's the only way that we're ever going to be able to walk forward and create health in relationship.
Right.
I mean, trust feels so risky and dangerous because to be fair, I think choosing trust gives grace, and sometimes it will be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair warning. I mean, it will.
And so, but it feels risky because
Yep.
if I live in trust, then I think that it's immediate adoption of more grace in your life for people.
Yeah, I like that.
I can't see how it isn't, because at its core, I think trust forces us to grace.
Agreed.
For people, and so yeah, it's really risky because straight up, people are going to fail us, and I'm going to fail you. You're going to
Exactly.
fail me. It's the same thing. Both of us are going to continually make
Right.
errors because we are still human,
Right.
and we're still continually being perfected. And so I think it's so important, though, because when you live in suspicion, there's no hope for clarity in it. When you
Okay.
live in trust, even if you get wounded, there's still always hope for clarity
Okay. Yeah.
and grace, and that creates gaps that are able to be overcome.
Right.
And I think that matters.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's turning to Scripture. The Apostle Paul tells us that he says, as far as it is up to you, live at peace with everyone.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say, by the way, I'm telling you, just live at peace with everyone. He's saying, as far as it is up to you. And so he's gaps created. You've got a choice. That person may take advantage of the grace.
Yep.
Those are relational red flags. That's a different thing to deal with.
Right.
But as far as it's up to you, your relationship health, your emotional stability and well-being, just the good care and feeding of your soul is going to be so much better when you go, hey, I walk in grace. I extend it. I try and I trust people. There's just so much less stress and tension because you're choosing to extend the same grace you've received out to others.
Right.
It's a complete shift in your own personal life then at that point.
Yeah. And this is a little bit of a backpedal, but I wanted to mention it because I thought about it as you were talking about suspicion. When we are filling gaps, I couldn't help but think about the times that we sometimes actually, on the flip side, fill our own gaps for ourselves.
Okay,
like
hit me.
So
Yeah.
let's say I actually run into a real life issue, and it causes me to be late, to be unprepared for something. Maybe on some level I didn't allocate time well or create space to accomplish or
Okay.
prepare for
Yeah, yeah.
something. Or maybe actually something just real came up that pulled me away.
Okay.
And so let's say you fast forward, you get to a meeting or you get to an event or something, and you're just not fully prepared.
Okay.
And I am met with trust, but I've already filled the gap with so much suspicion.
Suspicion
that everybody
on yourself.
else,
You're assuming you're going to be judged then.
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Even though I know.
No, I know that. Yeah.
Even though it's like, I couldn't do anything to control this. There are situations where it's like, I really feel like this was going to happen no matter what.
Right.
And because real life is going to hit at points,
Right.
or even when we're just being irresponsible, I think you could be met with trust, but I've already filled my own gap
Yep.
against myself with so much suspicion. There is no way
interesting,
that
yeah.
you're going to meet me any other way because I did it again.
So yeah, I like what you were saying about that, and here's way too deep of a dive into my brain on this, but I've had times where you've made a mistake, you've forgotten something, and you're stepping into that, and I'll sit there like you were talking about filling the gap. I'm approaching this. I'm already assuming, oh man, you're judging me. You're like, why'd you do that, man? And I'm already defending a gap that's been filled by suspicion that hasn't even occurred yet. So I'm already defending myself going, well, I have reasons for this, Zach, and hey, don't be mad. And all this is playing around in my head. Hadn't thought about it like we're talking about in this context, but you're right. I know there's a gap about to be created, and we'll talk more about that and what we do about it later, but I've actually put suspicion on myself at that moment. That is harsh.
And then how does it feel when you enter into the gap that you have
Right.
created?
Yep, actually in the moment now.
And and let's say it's between you and me, and I
Right.
go, hey man, it's okay. Like, we're fine. I know stuff happens. I trust you. You have a consistent history. Like, you don't do this. Like,
I thought you were going to say,
Like,
you have
man,
a
you're
consistent history. You always mess up
You
like this.
always
I am
do
used to this
this.
by now.
sus.
It's sus. Yeah, I just live in a state of sus with you. That's it.
That's probably true.
It actually just wows and surprises me when you show up on time and things. Yeah.
But
yeah, you're right. I
What
get that.
happens when you walk into it and it's the opposite of all that you've assumed and already filled the gap with?
Right. That's really a nice thought. I love that because I'm so glad you brought it up because I've as we're looking at, it's the interpersonal relationship, but it's also that inner relationship with yourself that you have to look at. So, well, that's what we got for you today as we're just kind of introducing the idea of this gap and the two options we have to fill it with. But in order to navigate this well, it's important that we are trustworthy. So if we really want to have a great relationship, being trustworthy as well as extending trust is important. And we'll talk about that next time when we see you.
This has been another episode of the Beyond Sunday podcast. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.